I can't think of any singular change that could more improve the world other than the monetization of Bitcoin. You get global human action flowing in a different direction because you change the base layer of incentives. Is it any surprise that when the producer's being scammed by the central bank, that scam doesn't, what's the old saying, rolls downhill? Like, of course it rolls downhill to the consumer, either as price increases or worse products and services. Theft reduces productivity. So every hour that human beings spend stealing from other human beings is an hour not spent being productive. And so as you increase taxation, which is theft, you're increasing the rate of theft, you're decreasing productivity in the marketplace.
Introducing the Blockware Marketplace. Start mining Bitcoin today. This has the potential to transform the mining industry, as now anyone can buy a Bitcoin ASIC using on-chain or Lightning, see its historical and live hash rate before purchasing, and be earning Bitcoin mining rewards in minutes. This brings transparency and turnkey mining to a whole other level. Start mining Bitcoin today at marketplace.blockwaresolutions.com. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Blockware Intelligence Podcast. This week I have on Robert Breedlove. Robert, welcome.
Hey Joe, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a while since I think I've heard you describe your professional background before you got into Bitcoin. Can you share more about that and how that kind of prompted you to dive into Bitcoin?
Yeah, I'll try and give you the short version as it's applicable to Bitcoin, but I have my undergraduate and master's degree in accounting and finance, and I was also a certified public accountant in the state of Tennessee. So, and my father was an accountant too, so I guess I kind of have this in my blood a little bit. And straight out of school, I worked in public accounting for 4 years. I was doing entrepreneurial, it was in the entrepreneurial services group. So we were doing tax strategies for investment partnerships and businesses, pretty much trying to optimize, i.e. minimize tax liabilities for large investment groups. And I did not particularly like that path. I learned a lot. I learned a tremendous amount, both in school and in public accounting, about business, the language of business, et cetera, et cetera. But the actual work is highly computational. Like, you're pretty much a human computer, especially on the tax side of things. The audit side is a little different in public accounting. You're tend to be a little bit more, you interact with people more, let's say, but with tax, it's just a lot of numbers and laws and processes and procedures. And so I just pretty much decided after 4 years that was enough for me. And when you work through tax seasons, which they're like 3 to 5 months before these tax deadlines, so typically, December through April is a big one, and then there's also big pushes before September and October filing deadlines. You work a crazy amount of hours doing that. Like, we would get emails, the partners in the firm would suggest we would work 80 hours in a week, 85 hours in a week. It was just totally inhuman. So 4 years of that was plenty for me. And I decided I wanted to do something more entrepreneurial. Public accounting is very linear. You pay your dues as a staff, and then you go to senior staff, and then you go to junior manager, senior manager, and then partner. And you can make decent money, but there's not huge upside. It's just a very linear path. And I wanted to get off that train. So I got into industry. I was pretty much a CFO for technology companies mostly, and did that for a number of years. And finally, I was with a hospitality technology company at my last role as CFO, and they had due to some changes internally, basically we had taken a lot of outside capital, and the board had changed composition in that time. And so over the few years that I was there, towards the end, the board ousted the current CEO. And then so I was kind of like put in charge, like an executive in charge role. And there's an interim CEO from the board that was participating as well. And so that was a good position, but it was and it was there was an opportunity for me to step into like the CEO role for that company, but I was just very burnt out on the politics, and it's really just the politics, I guess, that I was really sick of. I got very tired of dealing with all this back channeling and, whose agenda and who wants what. And it just, I don't know, I did not enjoy that aspect of the business. And things got more and more political as the business got bigger and I climbed higher. So, although I had a really good offer on the table, I did something pretty risky and I decided to just turn it down. And I was living in Las Vegas at the time. I was between Las Vegas and Vancouver, which were the two companies, or the two headquarters of the company I was working for were located. And I decided to just walk away from it and move to Los Angeles. I had one consulting client at the time, like a consulting CFO client, and I was just going to start my own business. I didn't even know what it was going to be, really. So, but I knew I wanted to not be in the political turmoil, and I wanted to go and live by the ocean. And so that's what I did. And I'm really glad I did that because it gave me the mental bandwidth to be curious again, to really start to. I am still an avid reader. I've been a lifelong reader, but I guess I was so busy with work that I just wasn't feeding my curiosity like I used to. But as soon as I made that transition, I had many extra hours on my hand to spend going down rabbit holes. And I stumbled upon actually the concept of smart contracts through Ethereum. And that got me to go down the smart contract rabbit hole, which got me into Nick Szabo's work. And that, basically one thing led to another. And before you know it, I'm on Coinbase buying at the time they had Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Litecoin, what I think were the three listed assets. And so I just started buying those. And then where my money went, my mind followed. And so I just started studying what I owned a lot. And one piece I didn't mention, but I had read The Creature from Jekyll Island years before at this point, back in 2004. So I knew central banking was a giant scam and a big problem, but I didn't know how to fix it. And then getting into Bitcoin, specifically getting into the book, The Bitcoin Standard, snapped that last puzzle piece in place for me mentally. And I came to see Bitcoin as the solution to central banking since it is disruptive to gold. And my business ended up at the time became basically we're running a hedge fund, so it was multi-coin, multi-strategy originally, but as my thesis became more narrowly focused on Bitcoin, so did that operation. And finally, I was just writing about what I was learning, going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, and that the writing was becoming popular. And then I was getting invited on podcasts to talk about it, which also became popular. And the feedback from people was just more, more. And so eventually I decided I needed to get out of the hedge fund business, which wasn't really like particularly enjoyable either. Trying to outperform Bitcoin, very difficult to do, very stressful. And decided I would focus on education. And that meant starting a podcast and doing public speaking and writing. And that's what I've been doing ever since. The What is Money Show launched in November 2020. I was very fortunate to have Michael Saylor as my first guest. And the Saylor series has become quite the timeless piece of Bitcoin content, and it really put the show on the map early. And now I am very grateful. I get to talk to smart people all the time about really big ideas, and I get to do it for a living. So very grateful to establish myself in this professional course.
Yeah,
I mean, that's awesome to hear your background. It sounds like you had a strong desire for like personal freedom back earlier in your career, and that kind of led you to down those rabbit holes and then eventually connecting the dots with Bitcoin. I feel like many people probably have that experience, desire for freedom from the get-go.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, definitely a lot of that personal freedom was kind of the guiding light. So glad it led me to Bitcoin.
Absolutely. Let's dive into to more about Bitcoin. I kind of want to talk a little bit about like Lightning Network and Lightning Network adoption. Like we've seen people show numbers of, hey, more and more people are transacting on the Lightning Network. We've seen applications like Nostr where people are constantly tweeting or posting messages and sending people sats back and forth. But one thing that I've noticed, and I think other people have noticed this on Twitter, is that a lot of people are using custodial Lightning solutions as that's just kind of like the easiest way to use Lightning. Like Wallet of Satoshi is like one of the most popular Lightning wallets. How do you envision Lightning adoption, over the next 5 to 10 years? Will people continue using custodial solutions, or will other people maybe start running like Lightning nodes and experimenting that way as well? How do you think this is going to play out?
Oh, that's a good question. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but Moon Wallet's non-custodial, right?
It may be. I haven't used that one particularly, but it may be.
I believe it is. Someone would have to check me on it. That's the one I use frequently and I don't use Lightning. It's not wide. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, so it's not widely accepted here. Like I'm a member of Bitcoin Park, so I can use it there to buy water occasionally. And I can also use it to pay Bitcoiners if, in the cases where I need to pay a Bitcoiner for something. So how do I think the adoption? I would imagine people would opt for non-custodial wallets, just given the lower degree of counterparty risk associated with that. It is extremely easy to use, honestly. It might be a little bit difficult for people still to get onboarded to Bitcoin and then learn what Lightning is and download the wallet and then fund the wallet. Like those still seem to be impediments perhaps, but once you're in that Lightning wallet environment, I think it's the easiest transactional tool in the world. You just, scan or receive. You either scan the QR code and pay or receive, generate a QR code for someone else to scan. It's extremely simple, it's extremely fast. I do think that we're moving from a world where it's very heavily intermediated by counterparties. Like that's the financial services experience most people are accustomed to. You pick up the phone and call your broker, or you email, perhaps with your broker or wealth advisor, whatever it may be, and you can suggest actions that they take. Sometimes you have to log into a portal and do this. If you're doing like a brokerage account or something, you might do it yourself. But I would imagine that more of these counterparties will just integrate Lightning and make it. I think Cash App has plans to do this. I don't know if they've done it yet or not. Haven't used Cash App in a while. Um, but I guess and look, this is just total speculation. What do I know? But we're moving from this heavily intermediated, counterparty rich world to a disintermediated, less counterparty risk world with non-custodial wallets and whatnot. So I would imagine you're going to see in the crossover more of these counterparties adding Lightning functionality. People may not even know that Lightning Network is being used. It's just occurring on the back end. And then over time, as more people learn about Bitcoin and as Bitcoin's market capitalization grows, I would expect more and more tools to become available that's a pretty consistent pattern we've seen with Bitcoin thus far. The more valuable it is, the more innovators, entrepreneurs, coders, et cetera, in the space. So the more tools are coming to market. And I think in the distant long run, it'll be much more self-service, right? I think I've also, this is somewhat unrelated, but maybe slightly related. Just the idea of collaborative custody really taking hold. I think rather than trusting one institution with your money, right? Like putting all your funds on deposit with JPM or Goldman or whoever, Bitcoin lets you chop that key up, right? And you can have this collaborative custody model. So perhaps we'll move into a world where financial institutions are, a one of five um, key holder, something like that. Um, so yeah, I guess that's a rough directional assessment of where I see things going. It'll just be more and more integrated to existing software services, possibly even happening in the background from the perspective of the consumer. But then over time, you're just going to get more and more of these tools built, and all of the free market competition that comes with that. The few that provide the best service will win out. And again, it's already not difficult, so I can only imagine it's going to get easier and more seamless, especially if phones start to implement like native key control and whatnot. Like, the phones and other devices will become more Bitcoin friendly over time, I think. And so that'll mean more, maybe even running nodes on phones or lightning nodes, who knows. But, the general theme would be the technology that's already easy, despite the impediments maybe to get onto it, is only going to get easier and more ubiquitous, and people will have more options. So definitely going in a positive direction as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I mean, 2022 was all about counterparty risk in crypto and even, Bitcoin specifically too, like with FTX, BlockFi. I think more and more people have learned their lesson. When we had on Saylor on the Blockware Intelligence podcast, I asked him kind of about the custodial versus non-custodial issue or debate, I guess. And he said, when you're a large publicly traded company, he's going to opt for a custodian. But I think he made an interesting point where maybe there will be more collaborative custodial solutions. Like I know Jesse Myers is launching OnRamp, which works with Unchained, another entity, and then MicroStrategy or whatever. Do you think public companies will actually trend towards that? I think when I asked Sailor at the time, there wasn't on-ramp didn't exist, and maybe like other solutions like that did exist, but they're still not very popular. Do you think public companies would trust some sort of collaborative custodial solution?
Yeah, I do. And look, I'm not saying this is going to happen in the short run. This could take a long time. I really don't know how long it would take. But just looking at it from a risk management perspective, if the option to have less counterparty risk is available through an institutional collaborative custody model, I don't see why firms wouldn't adopt that. Of course, there'll be resistance to it in the beginning, right? No one wants to be the first builder on the block, as they say in commercial real estate. But once some jump in, right, and kind of prove the model that you can have full or near full sovereignty over your assets by participating in that key quorum, and then you could outsource the other two key holders to reputable institutions. That's a good way to get counterparty risk near zero while maintaining virtual full control over your assets. So I don't see how it wouldn't go that way at some point.
Yeah, and I guess another thought is I feel like Bitcoin takes power away from central parties, whether that's large governments or large corporations. Maybe there will just be there will be an S&P 500 per se, but maybe they'll be much smaller and they can't grow as fast. So maybe they'll be more inclined to take more ownership and more custody, since there may not be hundreds of thousands of employees or millions of employees per entity. Do you agree with that, or do you disagree with that?
Well, let's see. It's just like you can't realize the full value proposition of Bitcoin until you have it in self-custody, essentially. So, and this comes in a lot of forms, right? It's like those that trust custodians, well, they might, even if the custodian is trustworthy and operates well and all of the above, there's still the threat of, a state targeting a centralized custodian to either nationalize it or whatever, pause withdrawals, confiscate, whatever it may be. And Bitcoin allows you to alleviate all of those risks just by moving into the proper custody schema. So, I don't know how, market actors are going to learn through the pain, and that is the Schelling point I think they will move towards. So as far as what your question is, companies getting smaller would make them more likely to take self-custody of their assets.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. The general theme in the digital age, and especially in the wake of Bitcoin, is decentralization, right? More power to the people. So I think a lot of the impetus for us building these monolithic fiat institutions, well, one is fiat centralizes, so that's going to reward a very few winners, quote unquote winners. They don't exactly win, because once you get to a certain point and you get bailed out, it's like you can't lose, right? You're too big to fail, something like that. That won't exist as much in a Bitcoin world. So you would expect more fragmented markets. I shouldn't say more fragmented. I'll say more competitive markets, smaller firm size. And the smaller the firm size, the less you're going to need giant regulated institutions to achieve high levels of trust. You can lower the cost of trust to near zero through cryptographic tools and digital technology. So I think, yes, smaller organizations are going to be much more apt to just control their own funds when the tools are available and the effort's somewhat trivial. And you could combine that further with all the additional problems that traditional banking is introducing. Like, I don't know if you tried to send a wire lately, but I mean, I get asked questions every time I send a wire about anything to anyone, and it's, I don't know, it seems silly. The whole financial censorship and control, as that escalates, you're going to further increase the incentives for individuals and businesses to want to fully control their assets.
Yeah, totally agree with that. On that note of potential state actor coming into like a regulated custodian, what do you think the chances are of, another executive order 6102 when it comes to global Bitcoin adoption? You think that's possible or likely or unlikely?
Well, certainly possible. I mean, you just said it, right? There's precedent for it. Um, I do think it's going to be very difficult to enforce. Again, if you're leaving your assets with a centralized custodian, you're going to be the one that gets hit with something like that, should it come to pass. Because there's so much more juice for the squeeze when the US only has to seize Coinbase, right? Versus trying to go and seize individual self-custody. Like, this is way too much enforcement effort to the point of it not being profitable. Whereas you could just seize Coinbase and, capture 10 million people's accounts or whatever the number is. So yeah, it's definitely possible. I would say it becomes even probable at a point when you actually start to see currencies failing. Right, the backstop for states today is, well, they can always just print currency to cover the gaps, right? If you've got a deficit, well, you just paper over it with the printing press. But if the Bitcoin thesis continues to play out and a lot of purchasing power is migrating into Bitcoin and away from fiat currencies, this diminishes the ability for states to print their way out of deficits, let's say. And with that comes, when they can't do that anymore, they're going to be increasingly desperate. All right, so there's going to come a point where the state is less concerned with its revenue now, because again, it can always just print new money. It can always close the gap. But as soon as that option starts to go away, it becomes much more like a normal business that's concerned with increasing its top line. And so when inflation goes away as a revenue option, then taxation is all that remains. So you'd expect to see, capital gains taxes go up, property taxes, et cetera, et cetera. And when they start to exhaust the market in that way too, because as you increase tax rates, there's sort of this, if you've ever heard of the Laffer curve, you actually decrease tax revenues in the long run because the market just works around it. You're another way to say this, and this is axiomatic in Austrian economics, is that theft reduces productivity. So every hour that human beings spend stealing from other human beings is an hour not spent being productive. And so as you increase taxation, which is theft, you're increasing the rate of theft, you're decreasing productivity in the marketplace. So although you would expect tax revenue to increase with increased tax rates, in the long run, it's actually the opposite effect. It decreases tax revenue. So as states lose the printer as a revenue option, and taxation, increasing tax rates is not going to necessarily increase the top line, then they're going to get really desperate and they'll start employing more exotic measures like Executive Order 6102. Now, even with Executive Order 6102, they did not go door to door and try to confiscate individuals' physical gold holdings. They did go to large centralized custodians and say that all this gold that belonged to these 10,000 people is ours now. So, if anything, it once again highlights the dangers of using a central custodian for Bitcoin. But for those of us that are in self-custody, I don't think you've got much to worry about. There's the possibility you would become a dissident effectively, because there would be a federal law passed that you would not comply with. But I would argue strongly that that law is unjust and unethical. Right? You're telling people they can't own information. It's like not own information. You're telling people that they can't have a secret. That's all Bitcoin is, right? It's like Eric Kaysen was on the show recently. He's like, you're holding a private key. It's just about keeping a secret. And if you outlaw secret keeping, I don't know what kind of world that is, but not one that I'm interested in. So,
Yeah, I agree. It would not be a great world to live in, and I hope it doesn't come to that. But it is possible, as you mentioned, and potentially could play out like that. Do you recommend people become like anons or pseudonymous, like on Twitter, when it comes to talking about Bitcoin, or do you think it's good for people to remain public and show their support for Bitcoin?
yeah, I try not to be prescriptive about this. Obviously, I am not anonymous, and I speak out about this emphatically. For me, I've just chosen to try and embrace the truth and let my life be the adventure that it is. Kind of just trusting the process. I'm not recommending this to anyone. Like, it's to each their own. It's probably intelligent to have a backup plan, right? There may come a point where Bitcoin hits a certain price and you're of a certain net worth that you may decide it's no longer worth it to be public or to be known, and maybe you can just pull the ripcord and become anonymous. All of these contingency plans I think are useful, but I'm not here to tell anyone like you should be anonymous or not be anonymous. I definitely disagree with anyone who speaks out against internet anonymity. Even Jordan Peterson, who I look up to a lot, has been recently going after this, and I just think it's fundamentally wrong, right? Privacy is the right to selectively reveal and conceal yourself, and it's a fundamental aspect of human freedom. Someone pointed this out to me actually. He goes, the next time what's the common trope against privacy? Well, if you don't have anything to hide, then why do you need privacy? But the funny thing is that almost anyone that says that to you, they tend to be wearing clothes. And so you have to ask yourself, well, why are you wearing clothes? If you've got nothing to hide, why don't you just run around butt naked all the time? Like clothing is like a visual manifestation of privacy, right? It's a human, I don't want to say human right, but it's a human universal. We all use it, have demand for it. Even primitive cultures use clothing. So yeah, I think we're playing a very serious game here. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if we're going to go toward this dark dystopian gulag situation that Eric Kaysen will tell you is definitely going to happen, or if we're going to have some kind of more of a smooth upgrade, like I think Safety tends to propose. I really don't know. I think in the distant long run, everything is much better for humanity, but between here and then, it seems pretty uncertain to me. This technology is just so radically disruptive. Um, I don't know. I just don't know what it's going to look like. So for me, I feel good doing what I'm doing. I feel good just trying to actually really embody, and this is something I'm working on now, and I hope to have more to say about it soon, but really just trying to embody the ethos of Bitcoin in my life, right? I want to be someone that is telling the truth, someone that is hardworking, someone that is self-sovereign, someone that has integrity, right? Does what they say they will do. All the things that Bitcoin does. Like it's almost like trying to emulate the useful properties of Bitcoin in your own life. Um, that seems really that just seems like the right path for me. And so to that end, I'm not trying to hide myself or anonymize myself. Doesn't mean I won't at some point. Um, it is possible to anonymize your Bitcoin, so maybe it's useful to anonymize yourself at certain times as well. But for now, I'm gonna stay right here and keep calling it how I see it.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah, on that note of privacy, like you mentioned, Bitcoin itself or holding Bitcoin is just holding a secret. So you kind of need privacy to keep your secret, to
Hmm.
therefore own
Exactly.
Bitcoin to begin with. So yeah, I thought that was a great point. On that note of, people disappearing, this is just something that kind of popped into my head. Trace Mayer was like and I would imagine you're familiar with some of the podcasts and the work that he did when he was in Bitcoin. He had some really, in my opinion, good takes in Bitcoin. You may have been, I don't know if you were the person that made him like disappear. That may have been American Hodl or somebody, but he
Yeah, I
basically
think
did
I think he
disappear.
pitched a shitcoin to HODL, and that was the
Yeah,
last thing I ever heard of him. Yeah.
yeah, that's what I heard. Do you think that that was like planned for him to go private? Like, do you think he actually believed in that shitcoin, or what do you think?
I have no earthly idea. I don't know Trace. I've seen some of his interviews many years ago. I have no idea. But I guess that's one way to do it. If he did do it that way, just go and pretend to be a shitcoiner or have the boating accident, right? That's the other one, and then just walk away. There's a lot of ways to do it, but I guess that is one. I don't know if that's what he did or not,
Yeah,
but definitely is a possibility.
yeah, totally. I hope he comes back one day and says like that was a joke or something. But it is interesting. I'm curious, what areas of society or like today's economic system do you think have been most affected by having like a broken monetary system?
If you've thrown your hands up trying to run a Lightning node, relax, you're not an idiot. It's not intuitive, and manual management means you won't survive. The guys at Encrypted Energy are fans of the pod and have 20 openings in their private beta for readers to trial automated L&D operations like rebalancing and channel fee management. Email paul at encryptedenergy.com and mention Blockware Intelligence for personalized onboarding. Stampseed's DIY toolkit gives you the ability to hammer the seed words generated from your Bitcoin hardware wallet into commercial grade titanium plates using professionally designed metal stamping tools. Their plates are fire resistant, crush proof, non corrosive, and will not decay over time, allowing you to hold your Bitcoin securely for the long run. Go to stampseed.com and use the code Blockware15 for 15% off. This offer is valid through May 2023, so get your Stampseed today. Foundation is one of my favorite Bitcoin companies. Their product, Passport, is one of the best Bitcoin hardware wallets on the market. It is air-gapped and highly secure. I strongly encourage you to go to foundationdevices.com and use the code Blockware and get $10 off your Passport. It's a great way to easily and securely store the private keys to your Bitcoin.
Oh man. Well, it's hard to say really. Well, because it affects all industries. Every industry that pays taxes is negatively impacted by statism. Um, and taxation is worsened with the existence of fiat currency because inflation is taxation, right? It's just the theft of purchasing power. But if I had to say which industries were most impacted, like I think when you look at the industries that are closest to the state or closest to the money printer, you see less innovation, you see less competition, you see more bullshit. Banking, right? It's a big obvious one. Like central banking is sort of the core of this whole thing. That it's just one. It's a giant institution built on lies that enriches itself through theft, right? There's really nothing good about it. I wish I could say something good about it. I guess it helped us scale gold. Like currency, gold-backed currency helped us scale gold, which helped us increase the intensity of free exchange, which got us into the modern era. But central banking per se doesn't really have anything to do with that. Central banking is the central planning of money. You don't need central banking to have a gold-backed currency. So if central banking is the black heart of the evil institutions in the world, the things that are closest to it tend to be a close second. So banking in general, fractional reserve banking, there's a reason we don't get much innovation, poor quality, poor customer service, 2 to 2.5 billion unbanked or underbanked people in the world. Like there's no incentive to take care of them. Other industries that come to mind are like insurance, which is also closely related to banking. Pretty abysmal. Pretty bad there. Yeah, low levels of innovation, high prices, low service. When it's very scammy, right? Like you'll pay into these people will pay into these things for years, decades, etc. And then when it's time to get a payout in the event of a loss of whatever kind, whatever casualty they were insuring, these insurance companies will use legal means to prevent paying out. Industries that have suffered. I mean, anything you'll notice too, and I wrote about this a little bit in Masters and Slaves of Money, which was the example that I lifted from Gary North in his book Honest Money, was the parable of the winemaker. And it's not just, when you print money, it's not just increasing prices that are the problem. That is a problem, right? That's the insidious theft of taxation without representation. But it's also this screwed up incentive that that the printing or the counterfeiting of currency puts on producers. So producers competing with each other, the last thing you want to do as a producer is increase your prices. Because every time I increase my prices, I'm sending a signal to my customers to look elsewhere. Right? It's like, again, the winemaker is the example. It's like if I increase the price of my bottle of wine, that's a signal to all my customers, my existing customers, that they should go and explore alternatives, look at other producers' products. So what a producer is more likely to do in an inflationary environment where the cost of their inputs are going up, they don't want to pass these visible price increases on to their consumers because, again, that's a signal for them to go elsewhere. What they would rather do, or what they often opt to do, is to debase or use inferior ingredients, use cheaper inputs. So in other words, make the product worse, charge your customer the same nominal price, and keep your profit margin the same. That's why I think debasing currency leads to the debasement of all the products and services in the marketplace. Because you have a bunch of producers trying to not send their customers elsewhere, especially when things are tight, and then they're looking to do anything they can do that's less visible than increasing prices to maintain their profit margin and maintain their business. And that often, if not always, comes in the form of defrauding your customer, right? The product that they've been accustomed to getting, a certain quality of wine, maybe now you're watering down the wine or you're using cheaper grapes or whatever it may be, you're now selling them this product as if it is the same as it has always been, but you're actually selling them an inferior product. And I think you see this everywhere, like fiat architecture, fiat food, fiat service, like everything. I don't know about everyone else's experience as a consumer in this world, but I am frequently and repeatedly frustrated as just my consumer experience of poor customer service, poor products, et cetera, et cetera. And I mean, maybe we shouldn't attribute it all to the money, but there's definitely a twisted incentive to defraud your customers when the money is being debased, when you yourself are being defrauded. And it's not really that surprising, right? If you really understand that everything's connected, is it any surprise that when the producer's being scammed by the central bank, that scam doesn't, what's the old saying, shit rolls downhill? Like, of course it rolls downhill to the consumer, either as price increases or worse products and services. So it's hard to say which industry, I guess, is affected the most because money affects everything. And it's really just a big net negative for the human race, in my estimation.
Yeah, totally agree. On like the nature of politics, like especially in the US, I feel like we have the left and the right like constantly fighting each other, disagreeing over everything. And then we kind of have this like new Bitcoin voting class, I would say, like people that, own a lot of Bitcoin or have a good chunk of their savings in Bitcoin and probably would pick like the Bitcoin favored candidate above everything else. Like it's their one major decision. Do you think like Bitcoiners as a group of people will be like a growing political ideology in the future?
Well, I hope so. I'm seeing. I spoke at the Mises caucus here, and they had an event here in Nashville a couple of weeks ago. And libertarians in general seem pretty pro Bitcoin. Like it's like whatever the market chooses as money, they're all about it. Obviously, most of them are gold bugs, but I think especially the younger guys, like they get it, right? They get that whatever the market chooses as money is what should be money. So I would hope to see more people taking an interest in libertarianism in general, and then hopefully that empowers the political party. They're also doing something a little bit interesting, which is instead of just gunning for the just gunning for the presidency, right? Trying to get a libertarian in the White House. They're taking more of a decentralized approach because that's a long shot, right? Like libertarians get 1% of the vote right now. It's always a red or a blue candidate that wins. I think they're aiming for something a bit more decentralized, which is just trying to get libertarians into local office roles, right? Like local sheriff, mayor, judge, whatever. And so kind of populating the United States political structure with more and more libertarians and hopefully, kind of a grassroots approach, I guess. Um, we do have like Cynthia Loomis. It's a big Bitcoin proponent. I would expect more people to just understand this over time. Again, more pain, more content, more time, like all of these things, all these roads lead to Bitcoin, right? People, there's more and more problems, either taxation, inflation, regulation, that's pushing people into Bitcoin. The content that many of us produce is hopefully educating people on the problems with central banking and why Bitcoin fixes this. Um, there's kind of a practical need for many businesses to use Bitcoin, uh, especially if you're in tech, right? There's advantages to integrating Bitcoin into your business and Lightning Network and these other things. So I would expect that over time, it's just going to be more generally understood. And as it's more generally understood, to the degree that our political framework is working, we would expect to see more representatives advocating for Bitcoin, in the House of Representatives, in the Senate, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what that will ultimately look like, but it does seem like this is one area of American governance that shines, that we do have this heritage of decentralization to some extent. We've lost a lot of it, but there is still there's something there that I think can mesh with Bitcoin nicely, right? And just as Bitcoin becomes more popular and more well understood, I would expect to see that more reflected in the U.S. polity than you would a centrally planned polity, right? Where it's just a handful of guys or girls that control the show. Um, but I don't know. That all assumes that I guess people are going to see the light, so to speak, and that's not necessarily an easy assumption, right? It's very easy to dismiss Bitcoin and not pay attention. It's very complicated to understand. So I guess I'm optimistic, but not certain.
Yeah, it's definitely fair. I guess if you were to be, very optimistic, how would you envision a Bitcoin-based economic system in 20 years? Like, will the dollar still exist? And, your optimistic scenario, will Bitcoin be not very volatile? Will there be like Bitcoin banks? What do you picture the world looking like in 20 years if it plays out in a good way?
Oh, well, if we have like the super optimistic scenario of hyper Bitcoinization within the next 20 years, and let's say in 20 years we're just on a fully functional Bitcoin standard, I think nation states are basically non-existent at that point. I think the world is a bunch of free private cities. Um, Maybe you'll stake Bitcoin with local governing bodies because Bitcoin will be the only money that matters in that point. And so you'll stake it with them. You'll agree to a certain rule set, right? Whatever the rules of the city are that you've signed up for. And then from that Bitcoin you have staked would be deducted the service fee you've agreed to pay the city every year, whatever that number is. And maybe also you've agreed to, if you break any of the rules, you'll have penalties that would also come out of that staking. And then I would expect to see reciprocity agreements between these free private cities, such that if you're a member of one, maybe you can travel to, and when I say free, I'm talking about probably 20,000 of these cities around the world. Because the other thing that's very influential on this is Bitcoin mining itself. It actually really drives populations into new places, just towards unused or underused energy resources, and to establish cities and whatnot there. So these agreements of reciprocity, maybe if you're signed up with one city, you can travel to a certain set of other ones that they've also agreed to. And so there'd be a lot of freedom. There'd be a lot more wealth because people would not be robbed all the time via taxation and inflation. So we'd see more peace, more trade, more wealth. Um, with all of that comes more freedom. So people would just be able to make ends meet with less effort. I hope that would lead to more human flourishing. You'd probably see this reflected in the arts and in architecture and music and personal development, maybe a spiritual / revolution in consciousness of some kind, which I think we see glimmers of today. There's a lot of people getting into yoga, into meditation, into self-development. I just did a Dr. Joe Dispenza advanced retreat here in Nashville a couple of weeks ago. 2,200 people, like all about improving their lives, like healing themselves, resolving childhood trauma. Like it's beautiful. There's a bunch of people that are very serious about becoming the best version of themselves, all gathered in one place for one reason. So maybe we could see more of that in the world, right? Versus people stuffing their face with Adderall and sugar and caffeine and alcohol and prescription everything, like just a healthier world. Less violence. There'd be way less violence because violence would not pay as well. It just really hard to steal people's stuff. And then, with all these options, with 20,000 free private cities, it's like not worth it to be violent or to try to fit everyone under one canopy as we do in the US. It's like, well, what does the 51% want? And then we force 330 million people to comply with that, right? Or so 51%, 150 million want a certain thing. You force the other 150 million to comply with that. That doesn't make any sense. Like if people they don't agree on a certain thing, whatever it is, abortion, like it could be something super contentious. Maybe there's free private cities that support it, and there's free private cities that don't support it, and you just choose where you want to live. Um, there'd be many more options for individuals to go where they're treated best and to experiment with different forms of governance. So we don't need this one size fits all governance system. And what else? I think people would be having more kids. I think people would be happier and healthier and being fruitful and multiplying and all that. So I think I can't think of any singular change that could more improve the world other than the monetization of Bitcoin. And, I don't know. I don't know how far we are from that. I'm very confident in that outcome because I don't see how you stop Bitcoin and I don't see people resisting incentives. People have always followed incentives, so far as I can tell, and I don't see a conceivable way to stop Bitcoin. So in that scenario, you get global human action flowing in a different direction because you change the base layer of incentives. But I don't know how long it will take, and I don't know. I guess it's important though. It's important for us to talk about things like this because it has to be a vision or an ideal before it becomes a reality. It's just like anything you want to do in your life. It doesn't just spontaneously happen, right? You think about what you want, you envision being there, you think what it would be like to get the thing or the outcome that you desire, and then you work towards it, right? And you fail and you stray from the path and you learn along the way. But it's without that vision or ideal to orient yourself towards, it's as if forward progress is not even possible. Like we know that at the individual scale, like that in your life. Whatever the thing is you want to do, you're not going to get there without holding that in your mind and working towards it. Maybe we need that in the collective too. Like we just need to talk about this, how beautiful the world could be in a world where there is no statism, there is no theft, or there's little to no theft, right? I'm not trying to paint a utopian fantasy here. I'm just saying that the degree to which we disincentivize theft is the degree to which we incentivize human freedom and flourishing. So seems useful to talk about that and paint that picture in the minds and hearts of people so that we can actually work towards it. And there's a lot of things to do to get there, but Bitcoin is the big obvious one, right? Just get the money out of the hands of the state, and then a lot of things self-correct as a result of that.
Yeah, I definitely agree that Bitcoin as a tool will naturally reshape incentives on the individual level, which would probably end up changing, broader collective groups of people. Last question, and I know we can wrap up. Do you envision Bitcoin failing in any way, or do you think that's just not possible?
Well, this is the big question, right? And this is what Bitcoiners as adversarial thinkers is what we're always trying to answer, really. That's the biggest question. Like, how does Bitcoin fail? Because if it doesn't fail, then we get all of these positive outcomes that we're always talking about that almost sound too good to be true. Like a lot of times when you're talking to an outsider, you sound and look crazy because you're saying all of these implications from, Bitcoin or money that it's hard to draw those connections. But I don't know. Like my assessment of it, and look, I'm not a technical guy. So I can't say to you with deep conviction that the computer science is rock solid, like nothing will ever break elliptic curve cryptography. And, I depend on, and this may sound bad in Bitcoin circles, but there are elements of trust, right? I can't verify everything. I have to also trust the people that I believe that have that knowledge, what they tell me, right? And not only trust what they tell me, but trust what they do, right? So seeing these people with skin in the game, not only advocating for Bitcoin, but also holding a substantial portion of their liquid net worth in Bitcoin. These are very high signal things that give me confidence in the technical prowess of Bitcoin. But assuming the technical prowess holds up, I don't see how you stop it from proliferating, because every individual is incentivized to preserve purchasing power in the best medium available to them. It's a matter of survival. It's not, do you want a leaky boat or a steel ship, right? It's not. You could say, okay, well, it's subjective and you can choose whatever you want. It's like, all right, well, cool. But the people that choose the leaky boat end up on the bottom of the ocean, and the people that are in the steel ship survive. So what does that mean? It means that Bitcoin still wins. Like, people that choose the best tool for the job outcompete those who do not. And so in the distant long run, assuming Bitcoin continues to exist, I think it succeeds. It's like they're almost the same thing. It's like Bitcoin's continued existence is its success. And the reason it succeeds is because it continues to survive, right? It's the one thing it's not compromisable in any way. Can't be shut down, can't be changed, can't be manipulated, can't be corrupted, can't be distorted, can't even be interrupted. It's just this like permanent spigot of truth every 10 minutes. And so the where I'm at currently, and this is why my conviction is so deep in Bitcoin, is like the only thing that can stop Bitcoin is a black swan. And a black swan is by definition an unknown unknown, like an unknowable unknown. So when someone says something stupid like, oh, SVB bank collapse, that was such a black swan, like, no, you fucking idiot. Fractional reserve banks collapse left and right all the time. Like, that's the only thing they ever do, actually, across the broadest scope of history. Definitely not a black swan. That's just what happens to fractional reserve banks. A black swan is not something you don't like to happen. It's something that you cannot see coming. You cannot possibly see coming. So what is that for Bitcoin? I don't know. Could be something in the technical protocol level, black swan, whatever, quantum computing without a quantum resistant response, all of these things we hear about. They don't particularly concern me. I think quantum computing is very far off. There could be something, what I guess would give me the most pause is some type of cosmological event, right? A gamma ray burst or a solar storm or a global EMP or solar flare or whatever, something crazy that wipes out all the electronics and like sends us back into the Stone Age. That's the only thing I could think of that would really be viable. But in those circumstances, like, well, all the electronics are kind of doomed anyways. So I don't know that. I mean, that would obviously be bad for Bitcoin and it'd be a huge blow to Bitcoiners. But I feel like everything's effed at that point. So that's where I'm at currently. And I haven't, I ask this question a lot to a lot of Bitcoiners, and no one really has a better answer so far as I can tell. They're kind of in the same boat. They're like, well, you end up in these weird, like deep, dark fantasy places. Like, well, if all these things happen, then that could be the thing that stops it. And so these extremely, what do they call it? Long tail events, right? Where if you're looking at the probability distribution, there's these little tiny edges. Those are the areas where you see the possible demise of Bitcoin. But I guess betting on Bitcoin, you're kind of betting on the bulk of that probability curve. and that no one really knows how to stop it. So,
Yeah, I think that was, very well said again. I mean, it's like you get down those rabbit holes of thinking how you could break Bitcoin or how you could make it fail. And it's like, okay, if that does happen, then the rest of the world is kind of like destroyed anyways. And society as we know it is kind of destroyed. So it's like,
yeah.
well, maybe that'll happen, but who cares at that point? um, but yeah, Robert, this was an awesome conversation. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Where can the audience, learn more about you and learn more about your show and what you're doing for Bitcoin?
Yeah, you can find me at whatismoneypodcast.com. And then I'm also on Twitter at Breedlove22, Breedlove 22. And thank you for having me, Joe. This was fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Robert.